Hello class! This week we're looking at the Northern Renaissance. Last week we looked at the Renaissance in Italy. Now to be clear, the Renaissance in Italy happens before the Northern Renaissance, but there is some overlap. Our objective this week is to make sure that we understand who are the key figures in the Northern Renaissance and how does the Renaissance spread from Italy to northern countries of England, France, and Germany. Here we have is a map. These are the trade routes during the Renaissance. Now it's important to look at this map because first of all, we see that over here we have Egypt and we have the Holy Land. These trade routes were developed during the Crusades in the Middle Ages. We have Constantinople, Beirut, and Alexandria. That is Old Byzantine Empire, which is fallen. Beirut is close to Jerusalem, and Alexandria is in Egypt. Now, if we look at this trade route, it is connecting between all the way to Italy. If we remember from last week, the Italian Renaissance, why the Renaissance happened in Italy is partly because of these trade routes. They were being influenced by different cultures in Asia. Up here, we have trade routes in the north. Again, if we were to think about how things spread, they often spread by trade. So you can see that most of these Hanseatic trade routes, which is the northern trade routes, they are connected to northern Italy. This is how the Northern Renaissance spreads, through these trade routes. People going to northern Italy, seeing what is happening in Italy, and bringing it back to their own countries. The Northern Renaissance begins. So we have people from German, French, and English. They are starting to hear about what's happening in Italy. Now remember, what has just happened in these northern areas of German, France, and England is we've had the bubonic plague, and we've also had the 100 Years' War. This has left the population sort of down after the Middle Ages. What they end up starting to do is they start to go and learn about what is happening in Italy, because at this time, Italy is doing really well. They want to learn, why is Italy doing so well? So people are sent to Italy and they learn about humanism from Italians. What they end up doing is by the 1450s, these people go back from Italy and they bring the ideas of humanism and the ideas of the Renaissance. So here we have is Northern Europe. Now over here, this is Germany, okay? So we see things like Munich, Rothenburg, Nuremberg. These are all parts of Germany. Then up here, this is a Flemish area, which we'll talk about, which is modern day Netherlands. Here we have France and of course England over here. This is an example of someone in the Northern Italian Renaissance. His name is Robert Campin. He's one of the first artists who brings back this realist look to the north. So how does this happen? How does the Northern Renaissance spread? It all starts in 1494 with a French king. This French king, now the name is not important, but he goes to northern Italy and he decides to take it over. Many of the artists and writers who are living in northern Italy, they basically want to go away from war. So what do? They move to northern Europe, okay? They figure that northern Europe is attacking. If we go to northern Europe, we will not be bothered there by war. Here we have an example of another Northern Renaissance painter. Now his name is quite difficult. It's called Hieronymus Bosch. He is a very well-known painter at this time. We're going to come back to him in a bit. So the Northern Renaissance begins. Now the Northern Renaissance begins with German painters. Particularly, we have this famous man named Albrecht Dürer. He is known for woodcuts. That means when you cut into wood and you print from it, and engravings. Okay. Now Durer, he actually studied in northern Italy. And what he is known for is combining Italian style, which is very realist. It looks like the object or the person. And combining it with Gothic style. Now Gothic style, if you remember, is a medieval style. Okay, so it's a Middle Ages style. After he studies in Italy, he goes back to Germany and eventually settles in England. And that is where he becomes well known as a Northern Renaissance artist. Another Northern Renaissance artist we see is Hans Holbein. He is also from Germany. He is known as well for painting portraits in a realist style. He also is studying in Italy, okay? But his style, his realist style, is more particular or not as colorful as the artists in Italy. I'm going to show you a few of their paintings. Here we have is a picture of Albert Dürer. Okay. Albert Dürer, this is, I believe this is a drawing of his. He often studied nature. Here we have is a wood cut. So he cut into wood, he put ink on the cut, and he printed it. And this is what it looks like. So as you can see, there are definitely elements in medieval style with Italian Renaissance. Here we have is Hans Holbein. This is actually a picture of him. This is a portrait that Hans Holbein did of King Henry VIII. Okay? As you can see, Hans Holbein, he is able to do a lot of detail, and he is able to make the person look very realistic. They look real. Here's another portrait. I'm going to go through these a little quicker. We're going to compare some of these later. Then we have the German painters and the Flemish painters. They're also known in the Northern Renaissance. One of the most famous Flemish painters is known as Jan van Eyck. Jan van Eyck, he is painting in Northern Europe. He was known for very small details. And he also created a new style of painting, which ends up becoming popular in Italy. So if you can imagine, Jan van Eyck learns from Italians, then goes past, creates a new style, which later Italians learn from him. Okay. We also have Bruegel. Bruegel, another Flemish painter, was realistic, but he is known for painting large groups of people. This was not as common in the Renaissance, Italian Renaissance. The other thing that Bruegel does is he focuses on everyday scenes, such as weddings and dances. Again, this is not something that is popular in Italian Renaissance. They actually thought that this would be a boring subject matter, but Bruegel is the one who makes it popular. Here we have an example of Jan van Eyck. As you can see again, he is very good with detail. Look at the type of detail that's on this man's armor. Then another portrait by Jan van Eyck. Here we have is Bruegel. Again, it is an everyday scene, something that Italians would think is a little boring, but Bruegel makes it interesting for people to look at. Christian humanism. There are two famous writers. One is Erasmus, the other is Thomas More. And what they end up doing is they study in Italy and they bring back the idea of humanism. And they combine the idea of humanism with the idea of Christianity. What this ends up looking like is that Erasmus, he believes that all people should study the Bible. Now, if you remember in the Middle Ages, many people couldn't read. So he promotes that all people should learn how to read and should study the Bible on their own. They should not just blindly listen to their priest. Thomas More, he wrote a book called Utopia. What utopia means is a perfect world without sin. It's basically he's writing about what heaven, if we can create a heaven on earth. And a lot of that has to do with being good to each other. So he believes that this is possible and he writes a book about it. Northern writers trying to reform. So we have the Northern humanists and we have Christian humanists. Okay? Now, what these humanists are doing in the North is they're mostly criticizing the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church has lost a lot of power since the Middle Ages, and it is because of these humanists. They are starting to look at Christianity and the church, and they're starting to call out the church who are doing sort of bad things, such as making peasants pay money or taking peasants' money. Another thing that starts to happen in Northern Renaissance is women's reforms. We have actually a female educated woman who stands up and actually writes one of the first novels of women. Her name is Christine de Pizan. She also promotes education. She believes that both women and men should be educated. This is a huge and very different idea at the time. Many people did not believe that women needed to be educated. So the fact that this woman existed and she was educated is very important for us to know. Another important woman to know at this time is Queen Elizabeth I. This starts the Elizabethan age in England. Now she reigns from 1558 to 1603. We need to know that she was a very smart woman. She spoke many languages, and because she was educated, she ends up promoting a lot of writing in England at this time. Now the most famous writer is someone we all should know. This is William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare is the most well-known writer in history. Now, William Shakespeare, he was born in Stratford-upon-Avon. This is in England, okay? And most of his plays were set in London at what we call is the London's Globe Theatre. Now, this theatre actually still exists in London today. So if you ever get a chance to go to England, you should go and see one of his plays here. Printing spreads Renaissance ideas. During the Northern Renaissance and Italian Renaissance, there is a very important invention that starts to happen, and this is called the printing press. Now, the printing press allows for many different copies of one book. You can have 1,000 or 2,000 copies of one book, whereas before, you would only have maybe a few copies of a book because you had to hand write it. But because the printing press is invented, that means that these books are able to spread over Europe a lot quicker. This also means that the idea of humanism and the Renaissance are also able to spread. It allows books to become quick and cheap. Now, of course, the first book that is printed is the Bible. This is very important because this marks where people, especially people who were peasants or in the lower class, they all of a sudden can get a hold of a Bible and start to learn how to read it. Here we have is an example of the printing press, okay, up in the corner. And here's one of the first Bibles that was printed. It is still in existence today. So overall, if we were to think about Northern Renaissance, we have a lot of things happening. First of all, we have tons of the spread of books starts to happen because of the printing press. We also have the idea of Christian humanists coming out, where people are causing the church, are challenging the church. The church is no longer to just say what they want to say and say you need to follow us in order to get to heaven, like in the Middle Ages. Now people can actually read the Bible and question what the church is telling them. We are going to discuss a little bit more about some of these artists and about the printing press and the spread of education in class as well. So if you have any questions, make sure you comment below the link or bring it into class. Remember, this is part of your participation.